Hey fellow gliders, welcome back. Today we're going to begin a deep dive series into the world of subscriptions and in-app payments. A common request from entrepreneurs and makers is, how can I monetize my Glide app? Glide doesn't provide any sort of native functionality to do this. We have to build it ourselves. So in this first video, we're going to walk through how to set up your Glide app for success, meaning how to build our data tables and how to set up user permissions and security. In later videos, we'll integrate a couple more no-code tools in order to automate the payment process. Before we get started, make sure that you have a Glide account and have upgraded it to any of Glide's paid plans. If you haven't upgraded your Glide plan, you can use the coupon code ROBERT15 to save 15% off any plan for an entire year. All right, are you ready to begin monetizing your app? Let's get started. Now, there are a couple of ways you can monetize a Glide app and a couple of ways that you can't. One of the ways where you can't monetize a Glide app is through ads. Glide doesn't let you inject any sort of script on the front end of Glide, which is typically required for any sort of ad-based monetization so that the app can track the user and all that. You can't do that in Glide. Another method of monetization that's not really available in Glide is any sort of like user-to-user payments, like two-sided marketplaces, where you're allowing a vendor and a customer to co-inhabit the app, and you're allowing the vendors to set their own prices, and then customers can purchase those items from the vendors, and then you are just taking a cut off the top for every transaction. That's not very possible in Glide without a lot of setup and a lot of API calls. And it's not worth any expert's time to really dive into or to explain how to do that. So instead, the two ways that you can monetize an app is to receive one-off payments or to receive subscription payments based upon content in your app. Now, in this example app, I have some content that I want to monetize, and there's a couple of ways I can make that happen. Ultimately, I need to have the user purchase something, whether they're purchasing these items one at a time, or they're purchasing just a subscription to my app, where then I'll allow them to access premium content. So you really just have to decide which makes the most sense for your app. Regardless, you're going to have content that your users can access. For example, I have this free content here, and then also content that your users won't be able to access. For example, this paid content here. And we're going to allow users to access the content that they can and prevent users from accessing the content that they can't until they subscribe or pay for that content. We're going to start off this video by showing you how to set up your app to accept one-off payments for the content. However, if that doesn't apply to your app and you want to do subscriptions instead, just look in the description below for the timestamps that I've included and feel free to fast forward to when we start talking about subscriptions. Now, to allow your users to purchase one-off content, we have to associate the content with the user. The most straightforward way is to add a table where we're going to associate the user's payment. So when a user makes a payment, it's going to come into our app so that way we can see what the user paid for. That means we need to have a users table. We need to have a content table. In this case, it's going to be these videos for these apps. And then we're going to need a third table that we can call payments. So I'm going to add a new table here. It's going to be a blank table. And we have to include information about the payment itself. I'm going to call this payments. And we need to associate the user. So we're going to do that via email address. So I'm going to ask for the email of the user. I'm going to delete this name column here. It's always a good idea to add a row ID column for every single new table. Let's grab the timestamp as to when they actually purchased it. This will be a date time column. And we need the content itself. Again, so in your content table, make sure you've added a row ID column, and we're going to ask for this row ID in order to make the association. I always recommend making matches or making relations based upon row IDs, because if for some reason you're using something else like the title, and then the title gets changed, that means your relation is going to break, and then the user will no longer have access to that content. So always use a unique identifier like an ID of some sort. So here we're going to ask for the content ID. This will be a text column. And then any other information that you want to include as part of that payment. Maybe you want to know how much they paid for the content. So we can actually say like the payment amount. This can be a number column. And we can specify our units as being a $sign, and we'll put it before the number, right? So if they end up paying like, $4 for the $400 for the content, right? It'll look at currency here. And honestly, that's really all the information that we need for the payments table. So the next step is to head over to our content table here. And we are going to query the payments to see if the user has actually paid for this particular content. So we already have the ID. So we're going to go ahead and add a relation column to all of the payments for a particular item. So we're going to call this relation or rel payments. And we're going to create a relation from the row ID of the content to the payments content ID. And we're going to match multiple because it's possible that more than one person hopefully is paying for our content. Lastly, we're going to add a query column off of this relation to see if the signed in user actually paid for the content. So we're going to go ahead and call this query user payment. This will be a query column. And we're going to query through the relation. And we're going to filter to where the email of the payment is the signed in user. I'll go ahead and save this. Okay, then ultimately this query column is going to be filled or not filled, whether or not the user has paid for the item or has not paid for the item. So let's put in some dummy data here. Let's say I'm paid for this fourth piece of content here. Ultimately, in our payments table, we're going to have the email address of the user, along with a timestamp, along with the content, and whatever the payment amount was. In this case, looks like it's $1. Okay, and we can see that in our content table, there's a relation to the payment, and we are querying the signed in user's payment. So this field here is actually filled in. And if I were viewing the app as anyone else, we see that that is empty because somebody else has not paid for that content yet. So now this is a flag of being filled in or not filled in, and we can use this in order to show or hide the content. So back in our layout, right, we can have here, for example, my content is a video. So I have an actual video file over here, and this video should only be visible if the content is free or if the user has paid for the content. So on this video, under options, we're going to set the visibility condition here to show when it's free, in this case for my app where price is empty, okay, or if the query user payment is not empty, meaning I've paid for the item. Okay, and then here to have like a fake blurred out video, I have a container. In this container, you see I have a bunch of separators just to kind of make my container larger. And then I have a hint in there and a button in there that we're ultimately going to set up to accept payments. And this container should only show up if the content is a paid content and where the user has not yet paid for it. So in this container, we're going to head over to options. And the visibility condition, we're going to show it when price is not empty, meaning you have to pay for the item, let's say, and where the query user payment is empty because they have not yet paid for it. Okay, so we've paid for this fourth item, which is this Gamify Glide Apps reboot. So if I go back a screen and I preview as the user, okay, we can see I can access this free content, this free content, this free content, but this fourth piece of content, even though it costs $1, since I've paid for it, I should be able to see the content. And when I click in, indeed, the video shows up, right? However, if I go to that fifth piece of content, I have not paid for this one, and so it's blurry. So we've set up our app to have one-off payments and allow users to access pieces of content one at a time. But what if we want to allow our users to subscribe to our app and thus gain access to all of the premium content? In that case, what we want to do here is underneath our content table, we just need to designate whether or not the item is premium or if it's free. So instead of specifying the value of each individual thing, We just need some sort of flag that it's premium. So where originally I had it set up where there was a price and then if it was free, it's empty. For this free and premium, I'm actually going to do the reverse. I'm going to add a column to the right here, and we're going to say is free. And this will be a Boolean column. And then we can just mark the things that are free, the ones that our users should be able to access. But we don't want to show true, false in the app. We want to show either free or premium. So what we can do here is call this premium display. It's going to be an if then else column. And we're going to check to see, hey, if it's free, if free is checked, then let's call free. Okay, else we'll call premium. And if you want to, you can add a little emoji. I like the diamond emoji. Or is it gem? There it is. Like that. Right? Just kind of make it call attention. And then this is what we display instead. So in our app, we can go ahead and display that instead. So now we have free or we have premium, right? And if it's premium content, right, we should hide the content. Okay, but how do we know if a user has paid for a subscription and is thus going to access the premium information? So in this case, we need to know if they've subscribed to our app in general. And the best way to do that is to have some information at the users table. So in our data table, we're going to go to our users section here, and we're going to add some columns here that's going to allow us to see whether or not a user has subscribed and has an active subscription to our app. All right, there's a few columns we need to add here. So the first one is going to be their subscription status. So we're going to call this subscription / which then creates a grouping in Glide, status. I'm going to go ahead and copy the subscription /. You see that creates a little group, which is nice. Okay, next I'm going to create the subscription ID. You'll see this is going to be important later on. And maybe we want to know when they first subscribed. So this will be subscription created at, which would be a date time column. Now, if you're offering different tiers or different plans of subscription in your app, maybe like the silver plan gets you some stuff, but the gold plan gives you everything, then you might also want to know what the subscription plan is. We'll talk more about that in a later video, but might as well set it up now. So I'm going to call one more column here, subscription plan, and save. All right, next, in addition to our subscription information, you might want to know some payment information as well. It's not as crucial to have as much payment information as there is subscription information, but it's helpful information to know like what they've paid, when they've paid it, and what their payment status is. So I'm going to add a few columns here. We're going to call this payment / I'm going to go ahead and copy that before I continue. Payment, we'll do payment status like that and save. Okay, then we can do payment amount. This will be a number column. And again, same thing. We'll make it kind of like a currency like this and hit save. Okay, and you'll definitely want to know what the payment date was to know when they've last paid. We're add a new column. We'll call this payment last paid at date time column. Save. And then ultimately, you're going to want to know for subscription purposes when their next payment is, so that way you can calculate whether or not they have an active subscription. So I'm going to do one more column. I'm just going to duplicate this date time column, and we'll call this next payment at, and save. All right, we're going to pretend that they've actually subscribed. So their status maybe here is active. Maybe they have an ID of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It was created today. Their plan is just the premium plan. Okay, their payment status was success. They paid, maybe our subscription is going to be $20 a month, right? So $19.99. They last paid today, and then hopefully if we're doing monthly, it'll be next month, like that. So this is ultimately the data that we're going to have automated whenever they make a payment, but for now we're faking it so that way we can actually build out the functionality that we want in our app. So if you need a moment to catch up, take a look at the columns here. You can pause the video and resume when you're ready. All right, welcome back. So now we're going to go ahead and set up premium subscription access in the content table. So we have whether or not content is free and whether it's been premium. Okay, so since now they're buying a subscription, we're not going to do anything here with like payments and querying user payments like we did earlier. Instead, we just need to know, did they subscribe? So if the user actually subscribed, if they have an active status, then we should be able to show their content. Okay, else we should hide it. So in our users table, let's create one more column here that just calls like an active subscription. So we're going to add a column to the right. We're going to call this subscription is active. And this is going to be an if then else column. And we're going to check a couple of things. The first thing is that they should have made a recent payment. So if the payment, next payment at, is before today, that means that they don't have a recent payment. They haven't paid for their next month or whatever yet. So if payment, next payment at, is before today, then false. They do not have an active subscription. Okay, next, it's up to you whether or not you want to allow for partial subscriptions, meaning that maybe they've subscribed and they made a payment, but then 3 days into their subscription, they cancel. When they cancel, this subscription status is going to change from active to canceled. And what do you want to allow in your app? Do you want to cut off their access immediately? Because if so, you need to check for that in this if then else. Otherwise, are you just going to give them to the end of the month since they paid for a month anyway? If so, you can leave it out. Okay, but if you want to include and you want to cut it off right away, then the next thing we can check here is to say if status, right, is not active, okay, then false. Okay, else we can say true. Okay, again, if you don't want to cut them off right away, then we can cut out this second step and we can allow just their month to run out based upon this first step logic. But in my case, I want to cut them off right away. So I'm going to add the second step and I'm going to hit save. Okay, we see that now their subscription is active, which means I can use this value now in our content table in order to determine whether or not they should have access to the content. Okay, so we're going to create one more column here. We're going to call this maybe can access. This is going to be an if then else column. And we're going to check for a couple of things. We're going to check to see, first off, if the content is free. So this is free column, right? If it is checked, then yeah, they should be able to access the content. So if it's checked, true, right? Next, we're going to check to see, do they have a subscription? So if the user profile subscription is active, is checked, then true. Else, it'll be false. Okay. Now there's also one more thing that we can add here. We can also check to see if you're an admin. I know many times you, the admin of the app, want to have access to everything. You shouldn't have to pay for it, right? So we can add that in as a case as well. We can kind of drag this to the top and we can say, hey, if the user profile role, right, is admin, then yeah, true. Like you get God access, right? Else false, and hit save. Okay, so we can see because this user has subscribed, they have access to everything, right? But if I view as anybody else, we see they only have access to the free content. And now this is the column that we're going to use on our content table. All right, so if we go back to our layout and we dive into any of this content, right, we can now use that can access column on these two pieces of information. So I think what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to duplicate this tab altogether so I can create these two different scenarios. So again, this first scenario was the one-off payment. So we'll call this one-off payments. And the second one will be subscriptions. Okay, so for the subscriptions, we're going to change our visibility. So for the content itself, we just need to check to see if the can access is true. So under options, we're going to get rid of the first thing here. And we're just going to check to see if can access is checked. If can access is checked, then they should be able to access the content. Okay, this container, which we're hiding the content, should be visible if can access is not checked. So under options, we can get rid of these couple things, and we'll just check to see if can access is not checked. Okay, so again, I can access free content, but I can't access premium content unless I've subscribed, like this user has. And suddenly they now have access to that content. So now the logic of our paywall inside of our app is all set up. So we have here as a recap, we have a content table. This content table is checking to see whether or not the user has access by either checking to see if they have premium access for subscriptions or whether or not they've actually paid for the content if we decide to do one-off content. If we decide to do one-off content, we need to have a payments table so we can match the user to the content that they purchased, and we're querying that inside of our content table. Okay, or if we're deciding to do subscriptions, we need to have some sort of subscription columns inside of our users table so that way the app knows which users have subscribed. So now that the paywall logic of our app is all set up, our next step is going to create the payment link itself. In our next video, we're going to show you how to create that payment link and then maybe where we need to place it inside of our app so that way our users can actually pay for the content or pay for the subscription in order to access the premium content. If you have any questions at all about what we did to set up this app for paywall purposes, feel free to leave me a comment below. You can also reach out to me in the Glide forums or on X at rpetito, and make sure that you like and subscribe so that way you don't miss the next video on how to set up the payment link itself. So I'll see you in the next video, and as always, thanks for watching.